So welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about AMD's Zen 2 architecture and the IPC gains that are rumored or claimed or sort of implied. And I'm joined once again by my brother, Minecraft Phenom 08. Again, I'll link his channel down below if you're into Minecraft videos. Great source for especially modded Minecraft. It's a great place to go and look at some of that stuff. So I'm going to start off with the Hexxus article, and this is from a while back. This is actually from the middle of October, when there was this rumor floating about. The number that was seen a lot was Zen 2 offering a 13% IPC gain over the current Zen Plus architecture, which, if you don't know, that's the Ryzen 2000 series of processors. And then more recently, and probably inaccurately reported, at least AMD seems to sort of be pushing the idea that it's at least not completely an accurate portrayal of this, is that the Zen 2 architecture could provide up to 29% IPC gains in certain workloads. And that's sort of the key phrase there, is in certain workloads.
Yeah.
So quick rundown here. There was in their presentation at the New Horizons event, or whatever it was called, AMD was talking about EPYC processors, and there was a benchmark there where the new architecture was giving a 29% increase compared to the, I believe it was actually compared to the original Zen architecture, right? So we're not talking about the 2000 series there. We're talking about the original Zen architecture to the Zen 2, so not even factoring in the Zen Plus. And we sort of texted back and forth a couple times when this rumor sort of came out, and it was before AMD's little update that they have at the bottom there. And AMD is pointing out with their update, you know, hey, this is in specific workflows with this one specific benchmark, and it's not. And AMD is clear about it not being intended to show an IPC improvement with this benchmark.
No, their IPCs are actually going to be 35%.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
Yeah, so they're gonna, they'll be approaching the same IPC gain we saw from like a pile driver to the original Zen architect. No, they are not.
Rip Intel.
Yeah, if hashtag rip Intel, I mean, get rid of all the, like, the rip J, rip Kyle, rip all those. No, rip Intel, man.
Yep.
No, but that leads into, we were texting back and forth about how if the IPC gains are 29%, Intel's in huge trouble.
Yep, because Ryzen architecture offers advantages such as like fabrication. It's just easier to fabricate. They're going to have a lot of advantages if that were true.
Right.
They'd probably be more powerful, be cheaper to manufacture, just be cheaper to sell. Just, yeah. Advantages everywhere.
Yeah, and Intel is still struggling, and here's, I guess, where we go on our first tangent now. Let's go to Newegg and look for an 8700K, see if they still have those in stock. They do. Looks like you can find them for $370. They were actually on sale for $340 the other day.
Really?
Yes, and I strongly considered getting one just so I could rip the lid off of it, put some liquid metal on it, and have a pretty nice, strictly gaming PC.
By the way, they are killer processors.
They are, and the problem is Intel can't pump them out fast enough. And it looks like Newegg, and it's probably not Newegg. No, it's not actually Newegg, but they do have 9900Ks in stock for the low cost of $740.90.
I mean, because that's fair, right?
The advantage, of course, being while you game, you can also heat your entire house, including the basement.
Yep. Sounds about right.
Provided that you can get the heat off of the processor fast enough. I would recommend something like a 1000 millimeter AIO, probably with a compressor hooked up to it. In fact, I'd recommend delidding and not even having the lid put back on. I would leave the IHS off altogether and just put a direct contact cooler on the die, because these things are hot. Speaking of which, and this is getting even farther off topic, I purchased, and it arrives today, a laser thermometer. I don't know how accurate it's going to be, but it'll give me at least an idea of like measuring heatsink temperature, or at least surface temperatures. So that'll be sort of cool to play around with.
You definitely should do some testing with that.
Yeah, that was one of my thoughts, though, with getting potentially an 8700K in the not too distant future, is looking at how hot my VRMs are getting, and to see how far I'm really pushing those. I know that there's been quite a bit of testing lately. I think it was Hardware Unboxed even that did something like looking at Z370 boards with a 9900K, and a lot of those boards shut down when overclocked because under a full load they would like shut down because the power delivery couldn't handle it.
I'm not surprised because like I have a Z370 board and it is definitely not. It's probably one of the lower end Z370 boards, and it handles my 8700K just fine.
So
but I know you can pump a lot of power into the 9900Ks, and I'm not sure my motherboard could handle that.
I'm gonna kind of shoehorn this back in there, but that sort of leads us. That sort of leads us back to when we're talking about Zen 2 versus the current Coffee Lake 9000 series, because to date. I have never had, and granted I have a first gen Ryzen 1800X that I've pushed to, I can get it stable at 4 gigahertz. If I push enough voltage into it, I don't feel like I got a great 1800X sample.
No.
But I run it at 3.9, and part of the reason I run it at 3.9 is also just because I'm too lazy to go through the tedious process of making sure it is 100% stable, because I have had it at like 4.05 or something like that before, and it would crash out of a long Adobe render, and I just got fed up with it crashing every now and then. So I just kind of said, fine, I'll just leave it at 3.9 because it's not really a real world consequence to me. But I've never had a problem with power delivery of any kind with the Ryzen chips. My Ryzen 2600, which granted only a 6-core chip, never have had to worry whatsoever about power delivery with that thing either. And I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that the next gen Ryzen chips, the 3000 series with the Zen 2 architecture, I'm really hopeful that they will be very power efficient as well.
I would think they will be, and the numbers that AMD themselves provided said that you'll be able to get the same performance as, I believe, Zen architecture with half the power. And
that's crazy.
I think that's what they said.
That's crazy. If that's accurate, that's awesome.
And then with the same amount of power, you'll be able to get something like 1.25 times performance of base Zen with the new Zen.
That's impressive. And
if true. Yes,
it's fascinating to me though that we've flipped roles where AMD used to be the furnaces. The 8350 had a stock 125 watt TDP, I believe, but when they pushed it to the FX 9000 ones, and they had TDPs of like 220 watts.
Yes, the House Fire Edition.
The House. So those things were hot chips, and even with a really good motherboard, like my Sabertooth 990FX board was a really good motherboard, but those VRMs got fairly hot with that thing
Really?
when I overclocked the 8350. Now, they weren't getting so hot that it was like risking thermal shutdown or anything like that, but they were getting warm enough that I didn't really like running them that hot. But now we flipped roles where now the Intel chips, they force themselves to switch back to solder because they can't keep the things cool.
And they did that wrong, but that's another topic.
And their solder job seems to be not the greatest of solder jobs in the world. Yeah, so it's actually annoying to me because the enthusiast that's willing to pay $500 for a 900K, if it were me purchasing one, I kind of wish they would have stuck with their crap TIM because it would make it easier to delid.
Yep. And it's kind of weird because everyone for the last few years have been clamoring for solder. And now that we have it, it's terrible. Thanks, Intel.
So what we should be clamoring for now is good solder.
Yeah. We should have specified.
Yeah, our fault. We left it up to Intel's interpretation.
Yep.
Nope. They misinterpreted the rules.
Yes, they did.
Any Cartman fans out there, you'll get that. So if it were you, if you were putting together, and we'll even stick with something that tends to favor Intel, and I think it'll probably still favor Intel even after the Ryzen third generation Ryzen chips launch. If you were building a gaming rig, though, which would you go with? And let's say that you have like a $1,000 or less budget. So you're sort of in the wheelhouse of where I think a lot of people are looking to buy a PC.
Obviously, the 6-core is where I'd be looking. If it's the same value as the 2600 or the 1600, the R5 1600 and R5 2600, that's where I'd be looking because those things offer great value.
They do. So right now, what is it? The 9700K that's the 8-core non-hyper-threaded for some weird reason.
Yes, it
so
is.
it is $405 for 8 cores, no hyper-threading on Newegg right now. By contrast, and I know that the 9700K is going to be a way better gaming CPU than a Ryzen 2600, which retails for literally under half that at $160. But what I'm curious to see, and like the 2600X is $220. First of all, I do expect Zen 2 chips to close the gaming gap. I still think there will still be a gap. I fully believe that. But I think the gap will close. But what I'm really looking at there is if AMD is targeting roughly the same price points that they have right now with their 6 and 8 core chips, we might see like a launch of a 6-core that could be like $250 at launch, and that might even be like the higher of the variants of the 6 cores. Like a 3600X for $250. If you can close that gaming gap down significantly, that's a really great deal.
Yeah, I assume it probably will be. Even if it's not 29% or whatever, even if it's like 5, 10, 15%. And
the thing with it, and it's one of the reasons I'm such a Ryzen advocate when I'm putting together builds, even if they're gaming builds, I'm usually putting Ryzen chips in because that type of a price difference is so big that we're talking about going from something like maybe a 1070 with the Intel chip. Now we're pairing a Ryzen chip with like a 1080 or 1080 Ti.
Yep.
Like it's a huge gap where, if you're putting the same GPU with the processors, you're going to get much better performance on Intel. But if you're putting in a really awesome GPU, suddenly we're talking about a different ball game completely. Like you put a Ryzen 2600 with a 1080 Ti, we're not going to be talking about 1080p gaming performance.
No.
We're going to be talking about 1440p or 4K, depending on your display and whether you sort of want eye candy or whether you want slightly less eye candy and just more frames. Because at those resolutions, the bottleneck is getting pushed more and more onto the GPU, and being able to get that better GPU then makes Ryzen chips a really great option for anybody that's not looking strictly at 1080p. If you're still just strictly looking at 1080p, then you honestly would probably even be better off getting something like a 7700K than a Ryzen chip in most cases, I imagine.
And one thing I'm thinking about is if you're at 1080p, why are you spending this much on a CPU?
Yes. Right. There would be no really great reason. Now, I could see maybe somebody that wants to do gaming and streaming on the same system, and Intel will definitely give you better performance. So fine. It's going to be a pretty niche group, though.
And the Ryzen processors, the 1600, 2600, they all do all right at streaming and stuff. So I mean,
they do.
It's not...
They do. But I suppose, especially if you're streaming a game like CS:GO, and you want the encoding power, but you also want the high refresh rate.
Frames.
The high FPS there. I could see it being that. I'm guessing that your thoughts are probably, and when we get back to the IPC, probably that we're probably I'm using the word probably a lot there, but we're likely looking at something closer to, if we're strictly looking at IPC, we're probably looking at something closer to the 13% that was originally rumored, and probably in most workflows, you're not going to see that 29%.
Which, if it really is 13%, that's still really good.
Yes, that's
much better than Intel has done recently, and that 13% almost completely closes the gap between what would be the Zen 2 architecture and Intel's current something Lake processor.
And the important thing to point out here is that when we talk about IPC, instructions per clock, we're also not accounting for clock speed gains.
Yes, and hopefully there will be some of that too.
Right, so if we can move from a 4.2 gigahertz on a really good Zen Plus chip to a 4.5 gigahertz overclock, we're taking that 13%, and then the actual real world gains are more than 13% by a little bit, just out of the clock speed gain. So, very hopeful for the next generation of Ryzen chips, the third generation Ryzen chips, which would be the Zen 2 architecture. The other sort of news that AMD is giving us is that the Zen 3 architecture, at least that's what they're calling it on their slides right now, which is essentially the 7 nanometer plus process, is supposedly on track for 2020. So AMD is really rolling along and keeping with their timelines for the first time in a long time. Meanwhile, Intel's are the exact opposite. Again, flipping just like the furnace thing. Intel's just keeps getting pushed further and further back, and they're still stuck on 10 nanometer. And that's crazy, especially because we were at one point, we were at a point where AMD was stuck on 28 nanometer with their APUs, and Intel was down at like 14. And now we are completely flipping the script on that. So very hopeful for the next generation of Zen processors. But of course, we want to know from all of the audience. I know I'll be down in the comments. I imagine Aaron will probably pop in as well. What do you guys think about some of these rumors coming out about these Zen 2 processors, which we're expecting in the first half of next year? Let us know those comments down below. And of course, if you like the video, give it a like, share, subscribe, comment. All my social media is there. The link to Aaron's channel about Minecraft and all things Minecraft things, when we're talking about modding especially, that will be linked down there as well. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.